In late 2023, a scandal happened in the book talk community that surprised absolutely nobody, to be perfectly honest. This happens way too much. Kate Corain was scheduled to publish her book through Del Rey. She had a publishing deal with Illumicrate for a special edition book box release thing. She was signed with one of the biggest publishing houses in all of publishing. She had everything going for her. And she decided, as so many people seem to nowadays, how can I ruin this all for myself? How can I ruin the massive success that I have been given in the fastest way possible? She decided to review bomb other authors. Now, before you click off this video, I'm not talking about Kate Corain today. She's been talked about enough, she's had her 5 minutes of fame, and she is a relic of the past. We're here today to talk about one of the books that she attacked with her review bombing, To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods by Molly X. Chung. Now, before I get started with the video, I would like to say I don't speak Chinese. I don't know how to pronounce anything that I'm about to talk about. I'm going to give it my best shot, but if I've pronounced something wrong, please feel free to correct me. I would love to not look like an idiot. Thank you. To Gaze Upon Wicked Gods is a debut novel. It's set to be part of a series, and it follows a protagonist called Ru Ying, who is 19 years old and living in a sort of alternate version of our world, but with magic, pretty much. Now, for reasons I'm not going to get into yet, the magical system here is actually not particularly clear, but for now, we're going to go with what the book says at this point in time, which is that very few people nowadays possess this magic. Anybody can have a different magical ability, but people can have the same. So, two people can have the same ability, but it can work differently for them. The book doesn't do much better of a job explaining this than I do, but let's roll with that for now. So we have Ru Ying, who has a magical ability. She is able to kill people. Yep. If you, like me, have ever found the situation in Harry Potter where Avada Kedavra is basically just a magic gun, it's frustrating, then you're gonna love this. Granted, this is a lot more complex than a magic gun, but it does the same thing. Basically, Ru Ying has the ability to reach into people and use their life energy to kill them. Just take it out of their body and kill them. Funnily enough, from the way it's described in the book, this process does not actually seem any more efficient or speedy or actually better in any way than just killing people normally, especially considering this is a universe where guns and swords and other forms of murder do actually exist and are easily accessible. But these are problems we'll get to later. For now, just sit with the knowledge that Ru Ying is 19 years old, she lives in a position of poverty, she comes from a formerly noble and respected family, but they now live in a state of poverty, and she can kill people with her magic. Now, I have a lot of bones to pick with this book. I have so many bones to pick with this book, but we will get into those soon. For now, let's move on to the first part, summarizing what actually happens so you don't have to read this. The book starts with Ru Ying going to a former childhood friend of hers to purchase drugs for her sister. All throughout the book, there's this sort of underlying theme about drug addiction and this sort of hyper-addictive, incredibly destructive drug called opium. We learn that Ru Ying's father died because of an addiction to this drug. Now her sister is suffering from the same thing, and Ru Ying tells us that trying to withdraw from opium is almost as deadly as continuing to take it. Basically, if you're addicted, you might as well count your days. There's nothing that you can really do. Ru Ying goes to her former childhood friend, whose name I think is pronounced Baihu. Deepest apologies for that, but to be honest, he is not particularly important. he's not going to come up as much as the book thinks he's going to. So let's move on. They have a conversation. It's basically just Ruiing info dumping about what happened to him as a child. She accuses him of being a traitor to their people, and they move on. Now, through a lot of, not gonna lie, quite boring info dumping, we do find out that basically what happened here is there is a portal linking this world to what is essentially our world as it stands now, except the Roman Empire is still a thing, it appears. The Romans come through the portal, they essentially conquer Ruiing's lands, they take over her people, they give them opium to be addicted to quell the masses, and they live their best life, profiting off of her people, her lands, her world, everything. Obviously, this is something they're upset about. They should be. They had no right to do this at all. Now here, if you've heard anybody talking about this book being a colonizer ex-colonized romance, this is what they mean. The Romans are the colonizers, Ruiing's people are the colonized. Romans essentially moseyed on in and said, this is all mine now, and there's nothing that can be done to stop them. A point that Ruiing makes that, to be fair, is not particularly common in fantasy books, and it has irked me occasionally, is that their magic is cool and all, but what can it do against science? We learn all throughout the book that the Romans have pretty much every sort of killing machine known to man. They have fighter jets, machine guns, bombs, all sorts of guns. There's nothing that the magic that Ruiing's people have can really do against that, so most of them have adopted to just sort of roll with it. There's not a lot of resistance. There's a sort of rebellion championed by this person who the book calls the Phantom, but to be honest, he doesn't really do anything either. This book has a really bad problem with introducing things that seem that they're going to be like a really big deal and then doing absolutely nothing with it. The Phantom is one of those things. Now, if you think that this is where you get to hear about some sort of plot or story or something, you're wrong. You're completely wrong. The whole book is focused on developing, or quote-unquote developing, the romance between Ruiing and her colonizer boyfriend, who we're about to meet, and there's not really a lot else going on, to be perfectly honest. What happens here can be summed up really fast, so that's what I'm going to do. Here we go. Ruiing sees the Roman prince on the street giving money to a homeless person. She decides, I'm going to steal this guy's money. I know I'm not going to get away with it, but I'm going to do it anyway, and he just lets her. This is the only redeeming quality that he has in the whole book. He never does anything like this again. There's a raid on the city. Ruiing is taken prisoner. She's held prisoner for a while, gets an infection in her leg. The prince, whose name we now learn is Antony, comes in. He essentially sets her free in exchange for her working for him. She demonstrates her power to them, escapes briefly, kills some people, comes back, and from then on she just spends the whole book essentially working as a mercenary for him and occasionally complaining about the situation of her people, but less complaining and more so thinking about how pretty Antony is. Towards the end of the book, they go to see an emperor of a sort of nearby land, and yeah, he gets killed, and then we learn the final revelation about Antony, and she finally actually does something and decides to join the rebels, and the book just ends there. That's the plot. She runs around, kills some people, gets taken in by Antony, kills people for him, spends a bunch of pages fawning over him, then kills more people, and then the final thing happens. We learn Antony's true character, in quotes, because, you know, he's never done a single thing to try and hide who he really is, and then the book ends. Great. Now, if you can't tell, I am itching to complain about this book, but before we get there, let's talk very briefly about the stuff I did like about this book, because it wasn't all bad. Don't believe my hate. It wasn't all bad. There are only two good things I have to say about this book. One of them is that I think the premise is very cool. I like the premise, it's great. If Molly X Chung maybe had some more years of writing experience under her belt to handle this sort of story with more grace, with more skill, then I think I would like it a lot more, because it has the potential to be a great book. It could be so much more than it is, and I think where this book falls flat is that it is a debut novel. Molly X Chung just does not have the skills necessary to do this story justice, and that is not her fault. Everyone starts somewhere, and to me, I think she has the potential to be an excellent writer. That shows clearly in the second thing I like about this book, which is the description. The description is absolutely beautiful. It's gorgeous. The metaphors, the similes, the way that everything is described is just absolutely beautiful, and I love it. The prose can be incredibly flowery, but I think that works in the benefit of the novel. I think her writing style really suits flowery prose. I think she is amazing at coming up with lovely metaphors, really gorgeous paragraphs. I am not a fan of this romance, but I'm just going to read you a brief little excerpt from the random chapter towards the end that's in Antony's POV, and you'll be able to see what I mean. Beautiful, magnificent. Antony Augustus was not a religious man, but he would worship at her altar, kneel for her until the stars perished, until both of their worlds were nothing but forgotten particles lost in the universe. Even if they one day became enemies, he would remember tonight, remember the softness of her hand in his, how she'd smiled for him once upon a time. Like, that's so good. It's beautiful. If I was actually sold on the romance, I'd be kicking my feet, giggling at this bit. It's so good. And I really think, with a project more aligned to her skill level, this would be honestly a work of art coming from Molly X Chung. Honestly, even though I hate this book, I am going to look out for her future works, and that is why. Okay, now we get to everything I didn't like. Technically, first, we need to discuss the technical structure of this book. The beginning is just not well done. Most of it is info dumping. It's just a constant, relentless stream of information, exposition, everything thrown at us unrelentingly, and we're not given anything to go alongside it, no context, nothing to even make this more interesting. It's all in the form of either bland conversations or internal dialogue, and it is painful. It's painful, it's boring, it's dull, and it makes the book a really slow and difficult start, which is a shame. All of this information could have benefited really from being worked into the story more naturally, but it isn't. And I think that leads me to my next point, which is that this book absolutely refuses to let you think for yourself. It insists upon spoon-feeding every single point to you, and on top of that, it does it in such a ham-fisted manner that you are honestly left feeling that the book has got a hammer with morals written on it, and it's clobbering you over the head. There's no skill, there's no nuance, there's no moments of doubt at all. To give an example, halfway through the book's sort of run up to the climax moment, we get a random chapter from Antony's POV discussing exactly how he feels about Ruying, laid out in the plainest English possible, because the narrative just doesn't seem to trust us to understand what is going on. And when I say it's done in a ham-fisted manner, that this is what I mean. This whole chapter is talking about how Antony loves her, so he has to leave her. But does he leave her? No. No, he doesn't do anything with any of the information he's just given to us. So not only does it feel like getting browbeaten, but it's browbeating for no reason. Nothing comes of this information. Nothing happens to do with it. It's just sort of there to make sure that you like Antony. And I don't like Antony. I hate him. He's just poorly characterized. He's poorly written. And it all comes together to form the crux of this book's controversy, which is the colonizer romance. Yep, let's discuss it. The colonizer romance in this book is so called because Antony is the prince of the Romans. He's, well, the prince of the colonizers, basically. And Ruying is obviously the colonized member of the people that they have conquered, or, colonized, but they call it conquering. Problem here is that the book is trying so hard to make it seem convincing that Ruying would fall in love with this man, and it just doesn't deliver at all. To be perfectly honest, I don't even see why a Roman would fall in love with this man. He has no redeeming qualities at all. He's just pretty. That's it. At the beginning of the book, we see him being kind to someone in poverty by giving them money, but that's literally all he does. That is the only good thing he does all throughout the book. For the whole rest of the book, it's just murder, torture, colonizing. And then to top it off at the end, we learn he's been performing human experimentation on Ru Ying's people. Does he have an explanation for this? No. He just does the same thing he's been doing for the whole book, claiming that it's for the greater good and he just wants peace and he's just trying to help. He's not trying to help. He just wants to rule. Throughout the whole book, Anthony is shown to be nothing more than just power hungry in a different sort of way than his brothers and his grandfather. He's manipulative, he's cunning, he's a prick. And the book gives us no reason to like him, so it's difficult to understand why Ru Ying herself would fall in love with him. Because she herself doesn't even give any reason. She just talks about how she likes the look of his shoulders, and she wants to lean on him and all this stuff, but he's such a terrible person. The whole book, Ru Ying is trying to claim to us, to herself, that she is a good person. She's trying to do what's right and do what's best. But then she falls in love with this person who's just horrible to everyone, and she can't even give us a good reason besides he's handsome. He's not as murderous as the other Romans, so I can ignore the murder that he does do. It's absolutely ridiculous, and to be honest, it knocks on to Ru Ying's characterization herself. The whole book is trying to convince us that she is a smart girl, but it's just impossible to believe that when you're faced with this situation where she's falling for the lies and falling in love with somebody who's never even tried particularly hard to pretend to be good. Obviously, the connotations of a colonizer ex-colonized romance are very problematic, but to be honest, it's not well written enough to be problematic. A large part of the problem with romances like this is that they try and sympathize with the colonizer who has obviously done many evil things. This book doesn't sympathize with Anthony, but it's trying to, but it's failing so hard. All of the reasonings he gives for his actions are supposed to come off as endearing and understanding. They don't. He just sounds like a terrible person. He does one nice thing, and it's at the beginning of the book, so it doesn't even juxtapose against all the other murder he does later. There is literally no reason for Ru Ying to fall in love with this man. No reason. And considering, the whole book hinges on this romance, if the romance doesn't work, this whole book falls apart. And it really doesn't work. It's not my place to speak on whether or not this book deserves the controversy that it's received for the matter of its romance, but I will say that the whole book technically is a failure. To be honest, this isn't the worst book I've ever read. I mean, I didn't like it, but I can see clear potential for Molly X Chung as a writer. I think she still deserves your attention, and I will be looking out for her future works because I'm hoping that with time and experience she will improve. The potential to be good, to be great is in her work, and I would love to see that foster in the future, but this book is not a great start. It's not a very good start at all. To be honest, if it wasn't an Illumicrate special edition that I have, I'd probably be donating it. I don't really want this in my collection. I'm never gonna reread it. So, yeah. But, thank you for listening to me go off my head about that, because, God, I've been holding that in for so long. It feels so good to be a hater about something, honestly. So yeah, thank you for watching. I will see you for the next one. Bye!